Okay, 8 years later, I think everything is actually operational. It's just crazy. There we go. Okay. So we're going to start today talking about what I call the temporal organization, which is all the pathways are on all the time. But then we're going to transition from that into what we're going to call rate control. We talked a lot about this in very abstract sense yesterday. Okay? But the idea of rate control of metabolism is if all the pathways are on all the time, then the pathway we're going to derive the most energy from at any moment in time is very much related to how fast that pathway can give us energy. How that speed of them giving us energy relates to overall energy demand. So it's going to come back again to this idea that we drew in the graph here. Okay. When you sit, you don't need very much. The aerobic pathway is relatively slow, but it's fast enough to give us all the stuff that we need while we're sitting. When we're walking, it's fast enough to give us most, if not all, at least to start with. Okay. And so on and so forth. So what we're going to do today, some of this is going to be things that are on that sheet that I drew you that we mentioned. We're going to talk about what are the points of each reaction that control how fast it goes. Okay. One of those things is the number of steps. The other part of it is going to be, if it's got multiple steps, where's the rate limiting portion? Okay. And so we'll try to identify those. Now, I want you to know those things very specifically, but then we'll try to say, how does all of that make everything fit together? When you go to run, start off using this, and it transitions to this, and over time it becomes this, and then when I get tired, it goes back to being something else. Okay? So, temporal organization. All pathways are on all the time. Okay? It's not exclusive in every instance, but in the vast majority, that's going to be true. So the pathway that predominates depends upon two things. What is demand? We drew over here. How much energy do I need? And how fast is a given metabolic pathway? And at that speed, at its regular speed, can that pathway provide energy? And so it essentially comes down to supply versus demand. To do an activity, I have a certain ATP demand. I must supply it. No matter what, to do the activity, I must supply it. So if one pathway can't get me all of it, I'm going to have to engage in the other pathway, and a third or a fourth. Okay. I will say this at the onset. In an ideal world, the only pathway we would ever use is the aerobic pathway. All the ones that we have, the aerobic pathway is the one where we essentially have an unlimited amount of energy that we can make because we've got lots of substrate. We have lots of fat that's stored. We can use that fat, right? We have some stores of carbohydrates and some blood glucose. We usually have plenty of substrate. Additionally, aerobic metabolism is really one of our pathways where it's not sort of limited by substrate and it's not limited by some sort of bad metabolic byproduct that we're going to make in addition to. So under ideal circumstances, that's the one we would use all the time. But we don't. So clearly there are going to be some circumstantial things that are going to necessitate us to be able to use. Well, let's start there. Okay. Here is speed of our pathways. Okay. Sure, you all are envisioning a multiple choice question where I put the pathways in order and say which one of these, rank these from fastest to slowest, or which of the following is the correct order for placing whatever these are. When I say oxidative phosphorylation, what I mean is the oxidative or the anaerobic pathways, Krebs cycle and the electron. When I say glycolysis in this, what I mean is glycolysis that takes glucose to pyruvate and pyruvate. The creatine phosphate pathway is the fastest. Okay. Glycolysis is the second fastest and the anaerobic third fastest. So let's go through then and let's talk about where do we control the rate of each of these three. Rate control of creatine phosphate is very simple. Very, very simple. Okay. Because it's a one-to-one reaction, all we need is ADP. Okay. We need ADP. When ADP levels rise, which as soon as you start to break down ATP, ADP levels rise. That's going to drive the breakdown of creatine phosphate. So we can take the phosphate and put it onto the ADP. Okay. It's a simple reaction. It's one step. It's one step. Problem of creatine phosphate is we only have a finite amount. Okay. There's only so much of it in your muscle. It's gone. It's gone until we stop exercising and can resynthesize. Okay. This is why we tend to use creatine phosphate at the onset of exercise, or when we start exercise and it's especially high intense. Energy demand is very large. We're sprinting or something of that nature. Okay. Even if we're going to walk or jog, we're still going to use some, but it really becomes the predominant thing when we're doing this. It can give us a lot of energy for a very short period. Use it. Okay. That's how it's raised. It's good. It's fast. It's very, very limited. So now we're going to move into the second. Okay, into the second half. Talk about how we control glycolysis. So when we look at biochemical reactions, and this is going to come down to kind of several steps that are going to be in here. Okay. With a biochemical reaction, one of the ways that I drive the reaction is by feeding the reaction more substrate. Put more things in, it will drive the reaction to the right. Okay. Other things that I can do to control the reaction are, if it's an enzyme controlled reaction, which glycolysis is, one enzyme is going to be the pinch point. One enzyme is the rate limiter. So if I can alter rate limiting enzyme, then I can alter how fast things go. That's the slowest point. I can make that slowest point a little faster. I can get more things through them. Okay. So we're going to look at 4 primary control enzymes as it relates to glycolysis. They're all on that piece. Okay. First place we control glycolysis is very simply by how much glucose can I feed into the reaction. Okay. Now, I added a little thing on your piece of paper that is not going to be on the slides until, okay, till Friday. I added the transporter GLUT4, which is how we get glucose out of the blood, which I drew up here, out of the blood and into the muscle cell. Okay. So it's not on here, but if I have more GLUT4, I'll bring more glucose in. Okay. How do I get more GLUT4? Insulin or muscle contraction. Cover that on. So what we're going to talk about here is how can I feed glucose into this reaction from glycogen? Enzyme that controls the breakdown of glycogen called 411. You may see it written sometimes as glycogen phosphorylase. It's the same thing. There's a phosphorylase in your muscle and there's a phosphorylase in your liver. Both of them function good. This is going to control, though, we're talking about muscle glycogen here. Phosphorylase, as is PFK, okay, they are what we call allosteric enzymes. Anybody ever heard of an allosteric enzyme? Riley's a yes. Biochemistry? What's an allosteric enzyme, Riley? Do you remember?
It binds to somewhere other than the active site.
Okay. What can we do to allosteric enzymes that we can't do to other ones? Remember? Y'all may not have talked about it. Allosteric enzymes can bind things that are not their actual substrate, and it will change their activity. Okay. So phosphorylase, it is meant to bind on glycogen. Great. However, calcium, AMP, ADP, as well as epinephrine and norepinephrine can all bind onto phosphorylase. When any of those things bind to phosphorylase, they make the enzyme more active. So, we get a lot of calcium turnover, muscle contraction. Where do we get a lot of ADP appearing? During muscle contraction. We'll see it on Friday. Guess what happens when we start exercising to epinephrine and norepinephrine? Go way up. So as we begin to exercise, there are multiple things that will bind to phosphorylase and increase its activity. The net effect of that is phosphorylase becomes more active, turn more glycogen into glucose 6-phosphate. So we're feeding glucose into glycolysis. Okay? When I feed stuff in the front end of the equation, it's going to drive everything afterwards to go. Okay? We're putting gas into the engine by giving it glucose. Okay. That's what's going on. That's our first control. If we did something where we blocked the effect of these things on phosphorylase, we would not break down as much glycogen, we would not feed as much glucose into glycolysis, and therefore glycolysis would not speed up, it would not give us as much energy. Okay. Our second control step. We mentioned this yesterday as this is the slowest point in the reaction. Okay? Right here. PFK or phosphofructokinase is the enzyme that is the rate limiting step of glycolysis. This is the slowest step in the entire process. It is also allosteric. In addition to having things that activate it, it has things that inhibit it, things that will slow it down. ATP, high levels, inhibit PFK. High levels of creatine phosphate inhibit PFK. High levels of acidity or hydrogen ion inhibits PFK. Lots of citric in the Krebs side. So look, high ATP, high creatine phosphate. This is rest, right? It's resting kind of state. Right now, you guys probably have plenty of ATP and lots of creatine phosphate. So PFK is in its slowest conformational state. As we begin to exercise, though, ADP, inorganic phosphate, and AMP, these three things are all going to be byproducts or things that happen as we start to exercise, will speed up PFK. Okay? They'll speed up PFK. That in combination with ATP going down, creatine phosphate going down, the inhibition goes away, we activate. So we're going to speed up PFK. So we feed more glucose in, we speed up the rate limiting enzyme downstream of glucose. And so now the byproduct is we're getting more more of this reaction that's beginning to run. More comes in, we're speeding up how quickly it goes through. So we're going to start making more and more ATP out of this conversion of glucose to corn. Does that make sense? Are you with me? We're okay. All right, good. Now, in very, very heavy exercise, when you make lots of lactic acid, which we'll talk about why that happens in a minute, when you make a lot and hydrogen ions become high, acidity increases, pH drops in the muscle. Okay, your muscles are beginning to burn. That comes back in and actually shuts PFK off. This is one of the reasons that high levels of acidity, high levels of lactic acid actually leads to fatigue because it shuts down some of this pathway or it slows it down. So we're not making as much pyruvate. So we either can't continue to make ATP that way, or we're not making as much pyruvate. We can't continue to jam it into the Krebs cycle and make ATP that way. Okay? Just one of the places that hydrogen can come from. It inhibits glycolysis because it slows down that enzyme. Okay. The last two enzymes, one we talked about a little bit yesterday, the other we didn't. I wrote them on our. The last two control steps in glycolysis are going to happen right here. They are the enzymes that will turn pyruvate into lactic acid, or will convert pyruvate over into acetyl-CoA and put us into stress. So what's going to happen after we have more glucose coming, we've sped this up, we're making more pyruvate, then we have to decide, are we able to drive that pyruvate over here so we can make a bunch of ATP, or are we going to have to drive it to lactic acid, make a little bit of ATP, but make some? The honest answer is we're doing a lot of it. Right? LDH, in many ways, is considered the final step of glycolysis. Going from pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, we call that not glycolysis. This is going to be here. LDH activity varies among fiber types. One of the reasons, if you have a lot of two fiber, they fatigue more readily, is they have a more active LDH. So that means when LDH is more active, for any amount of pyruvate that makes it to here, more of it will get turned into lactic acid. Higher the activity of LDH, more it's going to go this direction. And that's fine. We make some energy doing that, but you gather a lot of acidity. They actually, and you don't have to know this, I'm not going to ask you a question. If we look at the LDH, it's like a dimer or a heteromer or whatever it is, but it has these little isozymes. The H stands for heart and the M stands for muscle. The ones that are in type 1 fibers have two versions of the heart isozyme. They're very much not active. And the two X's have two versions of the muscle, which makes them. The fourth enzyme I'm introducing to you guys now. And its name very similar to here, but it's called pyruvate dehydrogenase, or PDH. Okay, PDH. This enzyme converts pyruvate to acetyl-CoA so that it can be put into the Krebs. Okay. There are things that regulate the Krebs cycle. There are things that regulate the electron transport chain. PDH activity regulates how much pyruvate from carbohydrates is going to be available to go into those things. Okay? It's kind of a multi-tiered thing that controls the speed of the aerobic side. But the first one of those is how much pyruvate can I convert to acetyl-CoA. Okay? It's allosteric. It gets activated by ADP and calcium. It also gets activated by having more pyruvate. Okay? Again, muscular work, we need calcium, we need ADP. So we're going to release calcium, we're going to make ADP. That's going to speed this up. At rest, PDH is not particularly active. That's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem in that rest exercise. It is inhibited. PDH is inhibited by high levels of free fatty acid and low levels of glycogen. So when I've used up all of my kind of glucose store that drives it, PDH gets shut down. If I have a large amount of free fatty acids available, I had some pepperoni and sausage pizza for lunch. Paul's Pizza Kitchen in Oklahoma City. That's where he took me today. We drove him around the city. Since I'm an Oklahoma City ambassador since we lived there, we went to Paul. Soon, it's been about an hour, about that. I will soon have quite a bit of free fatty acids floating around in my bloodstream that I can put into my muscle. If I do that, it will largely inhibit PDH. Okay? That is okay. Because all that's doing, as we will see later today, is when free fatty acids inhibit PDH, we just don't run carbohydrate metabolism into the Krebs cycle. We don't need to because there's a lot of fat that's getting put into the Krebs cycle and we're making all of our energy that way. Okay? I'll tell you guys now. Aerobic metabolism is the preference. In an ideal world, fat is the preferred substrate. They're both slow, but man, they make a bunch of energy and they make no metabolic byproduct. Nothing about using aerobic metabolism and then using fat as a substrate that's going to lead to. All of our other things, there's a chance that we're going to get fatigue. That's part of what's happening. We call that like a feedback loop. Okay. Does that make sense? Straightforward enough. Right? Okay. So let's imagine this scenario. We ask Bailey to stand up and do jumping jacks. Chick flick shirt. She does jumping jacks, okay? What is she making in her muscles? ADP, calcium is using to that. Thank you. Right? She's sitting there at rest. Glycolysis is largely inhibited. She starts exercising. Well, that needs calcium release, right, from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Learned that last week. We're turning ATP into ADP, lots of turnover. She didn't really do enough to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, but we're going to get a little. All of these things get added up. While she was doing that, we immediately activate phosphorylase and begin to drive glycogen breakdown to give her some more glucose. We also then, right through this, especially ADP, we begin to speed up PFK. So more goes in, more gets driven to pyruvate. Okay, and then while she was doing that, we were trying to activate PDH, start driving things this way. We run, more comes in, we make some lactic acid, we drive more that direction, get more energy every time while she's breaking down creatine. So the hope is that while all of this begins to get ramped up, you've got enough creatine phosphate to maintain whatever it is that you're doing until this process can get sped up enough that it can supply the energy to make the thing. You guys see how those things kind of all fit together? That's the important. Okay. Now, many of you know my hatred of stretching. I had to do a fact check on a popular science article the guy interviewed me about like a month ago. And they said, hey, what can you do to recover from exercise? And I said, literally nothing. Right? Go home and eat and then take a nap. That's probably the best thing. Like massage is dumb. All of the modalities we use in physical therapy, mostly dumb. None of them actually work. You'll feel better for like 20 minutes and then all goes away. Sorry. If you're sore, you're sore. Cool down, stupid. Why are you going to stretch afterwards? The warm muscle, fine. What does the stretching do? Makes you more flexible. Right. Wonderful. That's good for you. And like my wife, and you enjoy it. Awesome. Go to yoga class. I don't care. Doesn't prevent injury. Doesn't know. Okay. However, Kirby's going to come after that. Okay. However, I'm going to show you guys on the next slide. Okay. However, if you have to do some sort of exercise where your performance is going to matter, to me, cool down is dumb. You know what's not dumb? Warming up. Okay? Warming up is not done. Michael, what do you think? You guys don't warm up, do you? Just get in the boat and row, let's go.
Last year, this year is better.
This year's better. Okay.
We're not stretching.
Good. I'm happy with the not stretching. I don't care if you stretch beforehand. It's really better to stretch before than after. But you know. And when you guys race, y'all warm up?
Yes.
A lot?
Yes.
Okay. When you warm up, okay, you turn on all these enzymes by doing the warm up. If I just said we're cold, Julia, go out, let's go run a mile. You're gonna feel you're gonna feel worse when you start because none of these enzymes have been activated, nothing has been sped up yet. Glycolysis is as cold and slow as it's going to be. The aerobic pathways are as cold and slow as they're going to be. You have the least amount of glucose and free fatty acids available to you for substrate as you're going to have. So when we warm up, one of the big things that we do is we turn on all of these allosteric enzymes. So then when you go to race, this stuff is already active. So at the start, that transition from rest to going, we're not going to use as much creatine phosphate. We are likely, if we've sped up glycolysis and sped up PDH and things, we're going to make a little bit less at the very beginning. Same exercise. If we've sped up, you've primed the metabolic system. That's what I told you. I was like, look, recovery is dumb. Warm up is fine. There's physiological support for warming up. There's almost none for cooling off. Okay? There's almost none for recovery other than rest and eat. Okay? Average bro schmo, right? I've been thinking about what do we call, right? Like a lady bro or something that way. A muscle mama. Muscle mommy. All of the things that they do where they're sore or they're like, whatever, I got to get some protein afterwards. Protein's fine. Most of you eat a normal meal anyway. It's going to be okay. We're splitting hairs. When you're sore, you're sore. Your muscles have to repair themselves. It's an immune system response. If you blunt it, it's actually going to be wrong and bad. So, anyway, if you're sore and you want to feel better, make it hurt. Like, grab your muscle that's sore and squeeze it as hard as you can. And it's going to hurt. And that hurt tells the central nervous system to turn down sort of the pain sensitivity. That lasts for about 20 minutes, right? So if you're sore and you go run a little bit and you sort of stretch out and lengthen those muscles, the reason you feel better, you haven't cleared anything out, it hurt while you were running, and so you tricked your nervous system. And that's all ice and massage and ultrasound and infrared. It's like, hey, we're going to increase blood flow. You got plenty of blood flow. It's not a problem. It's not. It's not a problem. Okay. I will get off my high horse. But this, the allosteric nature of these enzymes, physiologically supports the idea of a warm. And that probably doesn't matter for most, right? Most of us are not going to go and run a race that lasts 2 minutes, where 2 seconds is the difference between first and 10. Okay? If it does, then a warm-up is really important. Physiology behind all of that. You say, why? It's because of this. Okay? These are data where they measured, and this was in a test tube, so it's you gotta take a little bit of a grain of salt. This is the activation or activity of the PDH enzyme. Here we have people doing at 0, they're resting, it's all down here. Okay? Then they did a walk at 35% of VO2 max. They jogged at 65% of VO2 max. Then they ran very hard at 90% of VO2 max. Okay? And you guys will note it takes about a minute to fully get PDH up and to be relatively close to its needed or maximal activity based upon the amount of ADP and stuff that is being generated for that activity. right? So, but you'll notice when it's at 90%, it's creeping up as we go along. And so the idea is if I do a warm up, now your question is how close to my actual race does the warm up have to be? Probably needs to be pretty close. I don't know what the exact sort of half-life of when this comes back down to baseline is, but you go and you warm up, you increase the speed of PDH. It's primed, it's ready. So when you start your race and you're here, rather than here, that's better, okay? You're going to be able to get more stuff into aerobic metabolism where you can make a huge amount of energy with basically no fatigue causing things being made much faster. I mentioned yesterday, we go jog. You feel fine for like the first 30 seconds because you're using your creatine phosphate, not a problem. Then there's that couple of minute period where you feel pretty crappy, right? You've used up all your creatine phosphate. We're still trying to speed up aerobic metabolism because it's not just PDH. There's some things down here that also happen. And so what happens is in that intervening kind of couple of minutes, you're making more lactic acid. That's why you have to get the energy from somewhere. And that's why you feel better. And as you can push through that and you get out here, like, oh, I feel fine. Not a problem. So the warm-up helps us get to that place right when we start and avoid that kind of couple of minutes in there. And for most of us, it's probably not that big of a deal. Probably not that big of a deal. But if it really matters, your performance really matters. Or maybe that intervening period is the difference between like, I'm not going to run today because I feel crappy. Right? I came, I did all of this, packed my clothes, put them in there. I got up out of bed at 6. Right? Ugh. So this is why. There might be some stuff behind all of it. Okay. Again, I'm showing you all the pathway. You do not have to draw this. You do not have to know this, but I just want to show you that here is PDH, here is it driving pyruvate into acetyl-CoA, and here are the things, high calcium levels, okay, that are driving activation of all of it. High levels of ATP, high levels of NADH, then when you've got plenty of energy, those are going to inhibit it. Low oxygen levels, which, most of us, we got plenty of oxygen. That would inhibit it. Nutrient deprivation and starvation. That would inhibit it. Why does arsenic kill you? It permanently blocks PDH. Okay. You don't have to know these. You don't have to know what PDK, right? These are pyruvate dehydrogenase kinases that are going to do things on the here to control. You don't have to know that. I just like to show you guys the entirety of the pathway that will support the things that I'm telling you. Okay. So you have enzymes that control the rate of glycolysis. Okay. Primarily, right, we've got rate of pyruvate formation, going from glucose to pyruvate. That's controlled by phosphorylase and PFK. That controls those two. We then have how much of the pyruvate goes to lactate and how much of that pyruvate is going to go into the Krebs cell. Pyruvate to lactate, so true glycolysis, is controlled by LDH. Okay, it's controlled by LDH. It's also, though, partially controlled by, generally, if PDH is more active than LDH, we're going to take more of that pyruvate into the Krebs. That's going to be a good thing. Okay? Under most circumstances, during exercise, glycolysis is not stimulated by a lack of oxygen. You got to go to quite the altitude to do that. You can let me put a blood pressure cuff on strict blood. Maybe at the highest possible intensities of exercise, rare occasion. Oxygen limits. Very, very, very. Okay. Glycolysis tends to be the predominant energy pathway when pyruvate formation exceeds the rate at which it can be used aerobically. This is the boundary. Okay. We're going to be over lactate threshold and get more and more lactic acid formed when we're making a bunch of pyruvate, and not all of that can go into the crust. So that tends to be kind of after about 30 seconds, from about 30 seconds to 200 to 2 minutes of exercise, or when energy demand is very high, when like we're at, say, 75, 80, 90% of VO2. Very, very high intensity. Okay. They're going to last more than like 20 seconds. I would argue that like lifting weights, right, mostly all driven by creatine. So in what instances might this rate of pyruvate formation exceed what can go into aerobic metabolism? Typically at the onset of exercise, aerobic pathways are slow and mostly inhibited. They got to have time to catch up. Or in very high intensity when the rate of pyruvate formation exceeds what can go into it. Making a lot of pyruvate. Okay. I want to point out one other thing that I should have done yesterday, and I did not do a good enough job. It's on your sheet. You might say, "What? You don't make that much energy, and it creates acidity, which is going to inhibit metabolism. So why would we ever make lactic acid? This doesn't seem like a useful thing to do." Not wrong. There is a potential reason it's better than the alternative. And what happens is, I apologize, it's not on there. Let me look at, everybody look on my sheet here. Okay. Look right down on the bottom under lactate dehydrogenase. Do you see at the LDH step that we take 2 molecules of NADH and they donate the electrons back so that we can form lactic acid? Okay. One of the things that's not a huge thing in glycolysis, but it is a little bit, it's a much bigger deal in controlling the Krebs cycle, is this pathway of glucose to pyruvate will not go if there are not available electrons. If you do not have NAD molecules, no electrons, to pick up the electrons that get stripped off as we break down towards pyruvate, the entire reaction shuts off. Much bigger problem in the Krebs. We've got a lot of electrons. So what going to lactic acid does for it is it allows us to turn the NADH that we made up here back into NAD. So it allows us to continue to at least have some NAD molecules available to grab the electrons so we can hopefully continue going through glucose. That's the other issue. That's the real utility of doing it. You make some energy. The energy has already been made up here. It would be great if it would all go this way. And if it can't, it at least lets us recycle that and continue this process for a little while. That's why I wrote that on the bottom. That's the other piece. When we go to lactic acid, we recycle back to NAD, which will allow the initial part of the reaction. Okay? Good deal. Okay. Let's talk about oxidative or aerobic metabolism. So we're going to make the assumption we got a lot of pyruvate. We're jamming a lot of pyruvate into acetyl-CoA. We're putting a lot of stuff into the Krebs cycle. We also have acetyl-CoA coming from fat, also going into the Krebs cycle, which is good. We got a lot of substrate. Okay. Assuming substrate's not the problem, then where are we limited? What's the slow thing? Well, aerobic metabolism is limited by how fast can the electron transport chain go and how fast can the Krebs cycle. And let's start at the very end with the electron transport chain. Our ability to run electrons from cytochrome to cytochrome, create the hydrogen ion gradient, diffuse them back through and make ATP is going to be ramped up by, shockingly, ADP and inorganic phosphate. Okay. It is inhibited by ATP. So largely, when we're resting and we have lots of ATP, the electron transport chain is largely inhibited. It runs very slowly. It runs slowly. Again, we need to warm up to speed it up. Okay? Increased electron transport chain activity leads to an increased need for oxygen. Should have pointed this out yesterday. We use oxygen at the last step in the electron transport chain. All of the electrons that move down the chain eventually get bound to oxygen, which then grabs two hydrogen molecules and we make water, H2O. Okay? So if you don't have oxygen, the electron transport chain will not work. You usually have a lot of oxygen. But if you remember from health and fitness, you remember from testing a prescription or one of those classes that you had it, as we start to exercise, when we measure energy expenditure in people, we often will measure something called oxygen consumption. Measure your expired air, and we'll figure out how much oxygen are you using. What we are measuring, and when you start moving around and VO2 goes up, what we're measuring is oxygen being turned into water and used into the electron transport. That's why oxygen use is one of our measures of aerobic. It's telling us what's happening at that last step when we're making ATP. I want to emphasize this bullet point. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor. That will be a question on the test. Could have made that more clear yesterday. It will be there. Okay. So I put the electron transport chain first because most of the time the electron transport chain is slower than the Krebs cycle. And so much of the rate of the Krebs cycle is controlled by the rate at which the electron transport chain can pull the electrons off of NAD and FAD and then send those NAD and FAD back to the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle can't run without its electron. So the availability of those is only as fast as they can donate that electron. Okay. In general, though, there is a rate limiting enzyme on the Krebs cycle, and I have forgotten what it is. It's isocitrate. It's like it occurs at like 4 o'clock on the thing. I should remember that. Every year, those of you that are doing well in class, I get a call from me next year. Every year we take a group of students to our regional American College of Sports Medicine meeting, and they have a quiz bowl. There's a giant trophy sitting out there by where you sign up for your advisor. That's the quiz bowl trophy. We won the quiz bowl this year. We've won it many times, several times. You win the quiz bowl, you write your name in Sharpie on the inside, you take the trophy out with you. Cannot comment on what has or has not happened or been drank out of said trophy. Stanley Cousins. But if you win the regional thing, where I'm going next week, they have all of the regional chapter winners compete against each other at the national. Pay for you to go. Our team, so they all abandoned me, we're going to get a free week in Denver, right, at the meeting. The last time that we won it, not this year, the last time we won it in like 2018, we went into the final question and we were winning, which meant they were going to win like $500 a piece. I don't know, it was whatever, it was something very nice. Final Jeopardy question was, what is the rate limiting enzyme of the Krebs cycle? Nobody knew. So I found, Dr. Mike did too after all of that, we will teach you guys what the rate limiting enzyme in the Krebs cycle is, and I have forgotten. I'll Google it when we take a break in a minute and I'll tell you. It is isocitrate dehydrogenase. Thank you, Cal. Thanks, Dr. Mike. Okay. It is isocitrate when that's at like the 4 o'clock position on the Krebs cycle. Okay. You don't have to know it for the test, but I'm just like, damn it, I gotta write it on. Because you never know. Anyway, our students always do well. We have to compete against the team whose advisor makes the questions, and they all shockingly always know everything. Okay. So that's what's going on. We can make isocitrate dehydrogenase rates and the Krebs cycle rates speed up by increasing ADP, right? And then obviously we have more NAD available. Again, though, Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain are largely inhibited at rest, which means they work, they still make plenty of energy, but they're nowhere near their maximal rate. And that's why it takes a few minutes for them to get all sped up. It's a very long process, okay, and many steps, and it takes some time to ramp up all of the enzymes and get enough substrate to make those things go. That is why at that sort of transition phase, aerobic metabolism is going to be slow. So when you go exercise, go warm up. And when you're done, go home. Don't stretch, don't walk, whatever. Okay? When you're sore, suffer. I'm sorry. Just deal with it. Have a cup of coffee. Caffeine is probably the most effective thing to reduce muscle soreness anyway that we have.
What do you think about ice bath?
Stupid. Like first thing in the morning, do you want the dopamine and epinephrine out of it, or do you like ice bath as a way to prevent soreness or recover after a bout of exercise? The question is, might you have been dehydrated and overheated during the bout of exercise? The answer to that is no. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything, but no, it has. There's no, if I'm aware of, there's no scientific evidence.
Like fries?
No. The process, LeBron, just because LeBron owns one at home and does it, doesn't mean it works.
We have it here.
I know we do. Here's the thing. At this conference where we won the Quiz Bowl, one of our former students, that's one of the heads of sports science for the Thunder, talked about this. There's a woman that came from Gatorade, who's a Gatorade scientist. We talked about this together. And they said, athletes think it does something. It's not going to hurt them, so let them do it. Right? It's a placebo. I'm doing something. So I think it's better. Right? And you may feel better, but it's not supported by like the physiology. You get in the ice bath and it hurts. And so because it hurts, you're going to decrease pain sensitivity. We do that as one of our tests in my lab on how well your central nervous system is able to function and modulate pain. Right? We stick your foot in a bucket of ice water for a minute, and then we test your pain sensitivity, ice water for a minute, test it again. If you have a good normal nervous system, the second time we test after the ice water, you're less sensitive to pain. People that have chronic pain conditions, that doesn't happen. But I mean, that's all that it's doing. You're like, oh, it's cold, it's blunting inflammation. Great. You know when the inflammation starts? 24 hours later. There's no inflammation immediately after you're done. There's also some evidence that taking NSAIDs and blunting inflammation means that in a month you're not going to have fully recovered, whereas if you hadn't done it, you'd be back in 2 weeks. So it's a tricky thing. So now, ice bath in the morning with some sunlight. The Huberman podcast tells us that's good for us. I don't know. I'm a chicken. I don't like it. I spent too much time in high school and freaking ice bath because I have bad. Y'all do ice baths?
Yeah.
Do you think they work? You feel better?
I don't know.
I mean, if you think that they work, then keep doing them, right? That's if you think it works, it works. So it's not scientific. Hate to say. Most supplements don't work, they're trash. Most recovery modalities, they don't work, they're trash. Just somebody wanted you to buy something. Sorry. Here.
What about peptides?
What about peptide?
I've seen a lot of stuff on my TikTok for like
Of course we have, yes.
re-engineered stomach peptides that help in muscle recovery, and another one that aids in like growth hormone uptake.
I have a difficult believing that there's some sort of stomach peptide that helps with growth hormone. But I mean, I could be convinced if you'd show me what it does.
You can read what I looked up.
Mm,
It's just a little bit.
sure.
It's
Pardon? Animal study. Lots of things work in animals and they don't work in people.
yeah, the protein of BPC that's on stomach acid. Not that bad against muscle and tendon healing.
Okay.
So it's just a stomach protein that they synthesize.
Probably all that does. And you just take it and then it goes into your stomach.
Yeah, you can inject or still.
Would you inject it right into a muscle?
I think so. I think some people do that.
I don't know why injecting it into a muscle would help you. That sort of physiological plausibility doesn't make sense to me because it's not normally found in the muscle. So I don't know why it would have any effects there. If you tell me that I take some and therefore it enhances or speeds up the breakdown of protein into amino acids or breaks down collagen into its individual sort of components in the stomach and therefore it gets into your system faster and maybe that has some predictable, like that has some effect. That at least nods a little bit more towards it kind of physiologically makes sense to me. I would again argue that we don't usually have a problem breaking down protein. That's usually not the problem. That's not the place where things get out of whack, but I don't know. So telling you guys, I told you all that we did a study where we put people on the crutches and we did lower limb suspension and they lost all this muscle for a month. The drug company, Procter and Gamble, had a drug that in mice basically prevented all muscle disuse, muscle action. They called it Mitomyce, which was awesome. We did this, showed, look, here's how much atrophy you can get. They used that model in clinical trials. The drug has never made it to market. My assumption is the drug would work in people. So, I don't know, lots of things go to animal models to die. They go to human models to die. They work in animals, they work in vitro and like single cells and those kinds of things. And they don't translate particularly well. Which is part of the reason the fact that we developed the messenger RNA vaccine sort of as fast as we did. It's just one of the most astounding sort of scientific things. Regardless of how you feel about a vaccine or somebody telling you have to take a vaccine, the fact that we made them and worked so well against the original variant so quickly is a marvel of science. The thing that was, 20 years in the making had these messenger RNA things. They kept thinking this is going to work, it should work, it should work. They never could quite do it, and it just happened that it worked really well for them. Suggest a couple of fascinating books about the development of paradigm systems. They're just really interesting from a science standpoint. So, and they're working on an inhaled one that is going to be basically non-variant and you'll inhale it and it will stay like in the nasal tract, so it will basically neutralize things when it gets in. And it will not be subject to its Omicron versus this, and even jigger than everything. The military's been working on this. So it'll probably be several years before it comes out. So they'll make them do real clinical. They did clinical trials with messenger RNA. Abrupt, we'll just say faster than normal. We just got lucky that it worked. Okay. 2 more minute break if you need to go pee or something, and then we'll kind of just don't go stretch. Yes, Rob.
So, could you? Is there like you might do that to like work people that's sympathetic and nervous system to do I that's your thing. If other machine has to reduce your idea as it turns out that signal, so would that chronically reduce or increase your parasympathetic side of your nervous system? And which notes that?
So, great question. So, it's fascinating. We have an idea with a piece of paper that's been sitting in my office for several years about attempting to actually test exactly that. Can I train your sensitivity to pain by chronically putting you into sort of very high levels of pain by ice bath. There's this interesting evidence. If you look at athletes in general, athletes tend to have greater, not sensitivity, but they have a greater pain tolerance than average Joe public. Question is that learned, the psychosocial behavior, or is it genetic? And that is one of the things, in addition to all of their physiology, that allows them potentially to be sort of high-end athletes. They can tolerate the pain, training at high intensity, and get better adaptations. They can tolerate the pain, discomfort of competing very, very high intensities, right? Is sort of chicken or the egg on this. We thought about like, well, let's do this. What if I take somebody that has chronic pain, and you dunk your foot in ice every day? Can we chronically crank down your sensitivity? I don't think it would be driven by parasympathetic nervous system. If you tell me that exposure to the pain will reduce the amount of sympathetic energy during that exposure, that seems plausible. Or the other part, because pain is such a subjective experience, your brain creates the pain. I give you something, you get all the nociception, I give you something in your spinal cord, and it blocks everything. You can't get to the brain, so you don't feel it. All the peripheral stuff is the same. Pain is a thing generated in your brain. Very simple. And so you teach the brain areas that process pain to see a certain level of nociceptive input and a certain level of sympathetic nervous system activity as being less dangerous or as less painful. Maybe. I think there is some evidence that we expose people to things painful a lot, that they get better at least at tolerating. There's also evidence that if you know how long you have to be in the ice bath, you will rate it as being less painful than if I just say you're going to be in this ice bath and at some point we're going to let you out. Same with exercise. You can perceive exercise to be less painful and no better. They know there's a fixed thing. They can sort of make the calculation in their head. I've only got to make it this hard and stop. Right? But if it's just kind of, I don't know, you're going to stop at some point, we'll win, I don't know, then they kind of freak out. So, I don't know, I think it's a really interesting.
Not saying something.
Of course I do. That's right. For all that you guys know, I don't know anything about any of this. I say it with confidence. Right? Several people write that sometimes. Course evaluations. Dr. Black just seems to know so much. And I'm like, okay, I have convinced all of you of these kinds of things. So, and I'll do that. That's also one of the things when you guys do your course evaluation with like my grad students, and you're like, well, they don't tell any stories in class. They've lived no life. They don't have any stories, right? They don't have any of these kinds of things yet to do them. They haven't had people ask a question. You're like, oh yeah, I remember last time somebody mentioned this. I need to mention this here in my class. The first one that I would teach, they'd be like, Dr. Black, wasn't Dr. Black. Then Chris just sits there and reads the slides to us. I'm like, yes, I was not a particularly good lecturer or teacher. I was terrible. Right? But we just kind of get better. 20 years later. Okay. Are we feeling okay about rate control so far? Okay. Doing okay. If you weren't, would you tell me in front of everybody else? If you're not doing okay, text me anonymously. Be like, I'm not getting to Dr. Black. Can we do it again, please? Because that was the other thing that I got from my evaluation yesterday. The person that said they were overwhelmed in class. I'm like, well, they never mentioned to me that they were overwhelmed. How can I help if I don't? If I don't know that I've confused you, how can I try to teach it in? So that feedback is important. If you don't get it, somebody else does. Yesterday, I was like, people don't get it. It really caused you all some problems. Okay. 2 points here. Okay. During submaximal exercise, oxygen is really not going to be a problem unless you're at altitude. Okay. And I mean really at altitude. Right? Like, You're in Colorado Springs and you're getting ready to go to Pikes Peak, altitude. Okay. Denver-ish. Anybody any snow skiers? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. You feel like, man, I'm at the top of the mountain. I'm out of breath. What is happening here? Because there's less oxygen. Okay. That part's real. Okay. During maximal exercise, when aerobic metabolism reaches its maximal rate, there's a chance that it may need so much oxygen that your ability to bring it in at the lungs, bind it to hemoglobin, and circulate it out to the muscle, and then diffuse it into the mitochondria. It may be limited. It may. It's pretty tough for that to be the case, but it may be. Okay. Now, application. Okay. Aerobic training increases the number of mitochondria that you have in your muscle. Aerobic training increases these capillaries that are the blood vessels that are right here. How do you guys think that impacts the rate control of metabolism? When I have more here, and more ability to bring fat and glucose and things here, and oxygen here, what do you guys think that does to our balance between creatine depletion, lipolysis predominating versus aerobic predominating? It very much does. Okay. Imagine, we'll do a little bit on Friday, we'll talk about muscle being a glucose sink, but imagine that where the Krebs cycle and the mitochondria are, imagine they're a bathtub inside your muscle. Okay. What you're going to do in that bathtub is you're going to try to fill it up with acetyl-CoA coming from pyruvate and acetyl-CoA coming. When I double the amount of mitochondria, which is what you get when you aerobically train, you can double the number of mitochondria in your muscle. Double. When I double the size of that bathtub, okay, more of this can go over here, or I run out of room in. So more can come here, so then it doesn't have to go this direction. Okay? Or if you go there, or I can use more fat. Remember, the fat will inhibit some of the stuff over here, so I don't need it. That's one of the primary things that aerobic training does. We double mitochondria. And so it really increases our ability to stick pyruvate in, which then limits how much has to go to life. And that's one of the big things. That's why if you're well trained, you can run at a higher speed, or bike at a higher power output, or row at a faster rate or whatever without making as much lactic acid. You handle more over here. Over here makes way more ATP than this one. And that's one of the big primary. Okay. Okay. I just put this in here because I think it's sometimes useful and helpful for you guys to see sort of the balance between anaerobic and aerobic metabolism during particular sporting events. Okay. I don't envision really asking a question. You don't have to memorize precisely what the event is or the percentage of anaerobic versus aerobic on all of this, but I think it's important to try to kind of illustrate this. Okay. Because then it also helps us to better understand why people with different fiber types may be better at different. Here's percentage aerobic versus percentage anaerobic, and we're just going to increase time as we come down, right? And so 30 seconds of exercise, about 20% of our energy is aerobic, about 80 is anaerobic. That's a combination of creatine phosphate, lipolysis. Then as we get longer and longer, out here at about 4 minutes, we're not too far from about 50-50. Okay, and maybe 3 minutes is about 50-50 in most people. And then we get all the way out here at 30 minutes to a couple of hours, and it's almost exclusively aerobic. And so we look, right, like 100-meter dash, running 100 meters. That's basically 100% anaerobic. Okay, weightlifting, gymnastics, these things are almost exclusively aerobic. soccer, tennis, these kind of intermittent things are mostly anaerobic, but there's plenty of aerobic. Okay, 800-meter run. Really good collegiate men, what, Hannah? Like 150 if you're a really good collegiate male?
148.
148. Really good collegiate women, low twos. Yeah, kind of right in there. 800-meter dash, that's about 50-50. Okay. So if we look at 800 meters or middle distance runners, they tend to have quite a few type 2 fibers. Right? To my rowers in the room, right? About 60-40 aerobic to anaerobic. It's very much going to depend upon how the length of the event. And then down here, right, we're at a 2-mile run, so about 3,200 meters. Speed skating at like 10,000 meters, running a 10K, running a marathon. These things are almost exclusively. Okay. Just some things to illustrate kind of the balance of all of our pathways together. Okay. I'm very torn about what we're going to talk about next. And I'm probably going to chicken out and not make you guys know as much as I would want. Okay. Only because I'm worried that will overwhelm you. So we have covered up until now all of the pathways, but we've exclusively used carbohydrates as our substrate. Now I'm going to walk you guys through what happens when we use fat. Okay. So I will start with this. The process of breaking down fat and using aerobic metabolism to derive energy from fat is only going to be aerobic. It's typically called beta oxidation. Okay. Now, what I'm going to show you guys, there's one single step that is also called beta oxidation, but generally people refer to the idea of breaking down fat. Called the whole thing. Just a semantic one. Okay. We cannot directly use stored fat. We must first break the fat into individual molecules called free fatty acids or into glycerol. Okay. Guys, when you have had nutrition or sports nutrition, talking about what a free fatty acid is and glycerol or any of those things. Usually you have 3 free fatty acids hooked onto a glycerol, 3 tail fatty acids put off the one glycerol thing. Okay. We store fat, okay, in adipose tissue. We have to first break down the fat in the adipose tissue to release the glycerol and the free fatty acids. We need enzymes to do this. These enzymes are called lipases. You should know what a lipase is. You have several different kinds of lipase, okay? Most of them are allosteric. They're going to be bound by various things. They're going to have. Okay, but that's going to be the first step. Break down fat. Then we stick that fat from adipose tissue into the blood. And then we have to transport it once it's in the blood. Okay, fat does not go well in water. It's got to be bound to something. So release it from adipose tissue, put it into the blood, circulate it in the blood, get it to a muscle, have it enter the muscle, okay? Then in a dumb thing, we're going to couple it with coenzyme A and then move it into the mitochondria, okay? That's going to use an enzyme called carnitine acetyltransferase. That's how we get this free fatty acid from inside the muscle into the mitochondria. And then once it gets into the mitochondria, we basically, fats are just big long chain carbon molecules, pyruvate or whatever. We just start stripping off 2 carbons at a time, taking those acetyl groups and sticking them, just like we would if it was pyruvate. Put the pyruvate in, we split 1 carbon off, it makes CO2, and then we put the acetyl group into the crust. This is the overview. I want you to know these steps. In this level of generality, I want you to know these steps. In some of these steps, I'm going to show you guys a lot of detail. Okay? You're not going to be responsible for all of that. So I'll try to point out a couple of key places that I do want you to. Usually because that's a place where we can slow down or a place that's going to be really a pinch point. Okay. So let's start then by talking about how do we store fats. We typically store fats as triglycerides, which we will abbreviate as a triglyceride. Okay. So we have triglycerides in our adipose tissue. Most of us have adipose tissue, at least I do, in my flabby tricep. A little around here, and more than I used to. It's a problem. I'm trying to deal with it. Okay. Not going very well. As an industrialized country, we generally 70% of the population has a problem with triglycerides here. Not great. It's not good for our health, but Doritos are great. Those Zaxby's. Okay. So here, adipose tissue contains those. We also have a small one, but you have triglycerides that are stored inside of a muscle. Okay, especially those of you that do a lot of aerobic type training to have a little bit more. People that are super sedentary and are obese also have a lot. And this weird thing. Okay, this is called intramuscular triglycerides. This is a huge energy depot between all of these. Giant number of kcals. Okay. We also have phospholipids right that are in our membranes and those kinds of things. We don't usually break down phospholipids very often. And then we have cholesterol, which we're going to just leave. Cholesterol is not great for us in some instances. We also make a lot of steroids and hormones and things out of that cholesterol. Okay. Inside of our muscle, these intramuscular triglycerides, okay, what I want you guys to be able to see is lipid droplets right here. All of our sarcomeres, lipid droplet, intramuscular triglycerides. How do they get there? We don't know. When I was a grad student, we tried to use MRI to quantify how much of this was in a muscle. We couldn't do it. We could never make it. We tried. Because in people that are sedentary and have a bunch, it's highly predictive type 2 diabetes. But then if you're a big runner or a big cyclist and you're at very low risk of type 2 diabetes, you also tend to have a lot because you use it during exercise. This is kind of weird thing that's going on. Just want you all to see a picture. Okay. Okay. So you guys remember, we break down in adipose tissue. Using these lipase enzymes, we break down triglycerides into free fatty acids, glycerol. We have to have a way to transport those fat molecules in our blood. Blood is a majority water, okay? And fat and water do not go together. So what we're going to do is we're going to store the fat in a chylomicron. We're going to bind it to what's called a lipoprotein, okay? I'm not going to ask you guys about VLDL, LDL, or HDL at all as a part of this, but just know that there has to be a way to bind and carry and transport these free fatty acids. Have to be able to do that. Okay. So here's a cartoon example. Here's some adipose tissue. Okay. There's a particular kind of lipase enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. We'll talk about it some on Friday. Guess what? Cleverly named activates hormone-sensitive lipase. Emily, what do you think? What activates hormone-sensitive lipase? A hormone? Okay. You guys want to guess what hormone activates hormone-sensitive lipase? Epinephrine. Okay. You start exercising and you release epinephrine and norepinephrine. One of the reasons that you do is turn on hormone-sensitive lipase, start breaking down adipose tissue, dump free fatty acids into the blood so you can use them for energy like 20 minutes. Okay? So here's our free fatty acids. Here's our glycerol. They get dumped into the blood. and they're going to get bound up by something, like chylomicron, some kind of transport protein that's going to be in the water. Okay, you will note here some of them are going to the liver, some are going to the small intestine. Don't worry about those. What we care about is what's going to skeletal muscle. It's into the blood, it gets circulated around to that skeletal muscle, and then it gets taken up into skeletal. Okay? So we've broken it down, we've transported it, and now we've entered it into our muscles. Okay? So this is a slow process. If you look at fat use during exercise, it often lags with the time of exercise. Okay? So my dad, the marathon runner, used to tell me in his half time, I sort of know some exercise, that he thought, just because it was in runner's world, that you didn't burn fat during exercise until you'd gone for 45 minutes. And that is decidedly not 100% correct. When you get to 45 minutes, you've had plenty of time for all of this to work. And so if you're running at 45 minutes, you may actually get to a place where fat is maybe the major supplier of aerobic. We did a ridiculous thing when I was a PhD student on a lark, which was dumb. It worked, but it was terrible. How many of you do cardio and lift weights on the same day? Which one do you do first? The weights over here? Cardio? The honest answer probably should be whichever one you care the most about, whichever thing you're trying to train the most. But one of the things that we know is when you do resistance training, you also release epinephrine and norepinephrine, you release testosterone, growth hormone, all of which dump fat into your blood. So we thought, let's do a bunch of resistance training, then let's ride the bike for an hour. See to what extent we can actually measurably increase fat oxidation during exercise. Same idea if you exercise first thing in the morning before you've had any right? You've activated these enzymes, you've dumped more fat into your blood because you're in between meals and everything. You've probably got more than you would at other points of the day. So when you exercise, if you burn 100 calories, a larger portion of that 100 is resistance training. So in our infinite wisdom, we did 6 sets of heavy squats, 6 sets of hack squats, 6 sets of single leg knee extension, and single leg hamstring curls, and just felt terrible. And my buddy's like, okay, Chris, get on the bike. Let's ride for an hour and a half. We did. I rode for an hour and a half on a different day. And it, unsurprisingly, after about an hour, the amount of fat oxidation that you get skyrocketed on the day. It was so good. I have done a lot of really bad things in the name of science, while also exercising. Several of which have included sticking thermal probes up my butt. Oh yeah, that's how you measure core body temperature. I'm telling you, the rectal thermometer is way better. They make another one where it goes up your nose, down into your throat, and sits in your esophagus. I'm telling you, the rectal one's better. None of it is good, but it's all not great. This was before Nike made the little stupid pills you can eat, and it just sits in your stomach. And you walk up to somebody, you're like, "What's Kyle's, temperature?" Okay. Football uses those too. Monitor heat stress. Yeah, you just walk up to him and it will tell. Yeah. The little thermo, those are quite expensive. We would do this. One of the labs, when I was at Georgia, they studied thermal radiation, heat stress. So, in order that you don't kill people, you have to know their core body temperature. 1 of 2 ways to measure. So, and it would always involve ride the bike for 2 hours, right? With the thermo up your butt. Not great. But anyway, as I said, I've done a lot of terrible things for science. This might have been the worst. Okay, I've never, ever in my life during cardio ever felt so bad as that last half hour of doing it. My glycogen was gone, like everything was terrible. Okay. But it did what we wanted. I burned some more fat. But when we ran the numbers, it was like you burned 25 extra calories of fat. I'm like, no, that's not enough. There's no way that's enough to matter. I mean, it's a real number. It's a real thing. You exercise in the morning and you haven't eaten, you'll burn a greater proportion of your fat. So will if you walk. When you walk versus running, a greater proportion of your calories burned comes from fat. The problem is, when you walk, you don't burn very many calories. When you exercise in the morning and you haven't had any carbs, you can't run as long or as fast most of the time. So your total bout tends to burn fewer total calories. And so it's kind of a give or take. But that's what's going on here. We can manipulate the physiology of this to actually alter how much fat gets into the blood, which will then alter how much fat gets into the muscle, which alters then how much fat gets put into the Krebs cycle. We can alter those things. Again, if we increase substrate availability and shove more in, it will use more. Okay? That's where we're going to get with all this.
How we got off talking about freaking thermal probe.
Anyway, you can tell I still have nightmares.
So I will see the person that made me do it at ACSM next week, and I will remind them. Be like, we talked about this in class, and it's still terrible 20 years later. But you know, when your friend's doing their dissertation and they need subjects, and it's hard to recruit people, right? Because of what that is, what are you going to do? They're like, I'm going to do yours, but you got to come do my terrible thing too. And so we kind of work.
So this shows, right, the first part, lipolysis and adipose tissue, right? We're going to then get free fatty acids into the vasculature. Okay, that's step 2. Now we've moved here's some interstitial space out of the blood vessel into the interstitium and then into the sarcolemma. So there are multiple receptors on the sarcolemma that are sensitive to free fatty acids. Okay, you'll see some of them here, right? FAB-P, fat CD36, FAP-P, and there's some other ones that we don't know. You don't have to know. But there are receptors on the membrane. The free fatty acid floats by, it binds to the receptor, we pull it in. Here's GLUT4, there's glucose, here's the part we've already talked about, right? Going to pyruvate, Krebs cycle. This comes in here. Now, we do some, what I think are some very inexplicable things to move all of this through. So, we put the free fatty acid in, and then we bind it to coenzyme A. Kind of like what we do here, okay? It binds to coenzyme A. We then do some biochemical things, and we go from a free fatty acid to something called acyl-CoA. Don't have to know this, but it's this weird thing. Acyl-CoA then binds to a molecule on the mitochondria called CPT1. CPT1 stands for carnitine palmitoyltransferase. It's an enzyme. And what it does is it takes the acyl-CoA, it binds here, and then it makes acylcarnitine, and it moves the carnitine in to the mitochondria. Once it's in, though, we then turn it back into acyl-CoA. I don't understand. Why don't we just go acyl-CoA in? Nobody knows. But it does that, okay? This is sometimes called activation. Step 4 and 5 are sometimes called activation. Hooking it to coenzyme A and then moving it is called, we're activating it so that it can be used for the Krebs cycle. We have acyl-CoA. We turn the acyl-CoA into acetyl-CoA, and then that acetyl-CoA just goes into the Krebs cycle, just as though it was acetyl-CoA that came. Okay. That's kind of what. All I want you guys to know, Polycys, we break it down. It goes into the blood. From the blood, we put it into the muscle. Once it's in the muscle, we transfer it into the mitochondria. Once we transfer it into the mitochondria, we then stick it into the Krebs. That's what we do. The rest of it is not simply hand waving, but it's beyond the scope of what we do. Okay? Because our adaptations to training, our hormonal control, and all of those things happen up here and down here. A lot of this middle stuff, just kind of, this is what the way it is. Right?
This is fat oxidation. Okay, so I've got this written out in the stages in a little bit more detail. Mobilization or breakdown, we call that lipolysis. There's this hormone-sensitive lipase. There's also another lipase called adipose tissue triglyceride lipase. You don't have to know you have to know either of these two. Okay. Then gets into, right, we're going to put it in circulation. It's going to get bound to things. We're going to bind some of it to albumin, which is this giant protein. It circulates, right? You don't have to worry about it. I'm just showing you. Again, epinephrine, norepinephrine, insulin, and adenosine are going to activate hormone-sensitive lipase. They're going to activate, right, adipose tissue triglyceride lipase, and that's going to lead to the break. That's the big deal. Okay. So I suppose if you want to burn more fat, stress yourself out. I'm serious, right? When you're stressed, epinephrine and norepinephrine are high. You'll mobilize more fat. Here's this uptake, right? We take about 50% of whatever's in the blood out. All of these proteins are going to be kind of our transporters and those things. You don't have to know any of these. Just want to show you that there's this complicated process that goes on. But it's in the blood. It binds to a receptor on the surface of the sarcolemma. It gets brought inside. We do some fancy stuff to it, and then we stick it in the mitochondria. That's where we are. Okay. Okay. Then there's this weird activation step, like I told you, where we have our free fatty acid, then we make it into this acyl-CoA, we hook it onto carnitine, move it with the carnitine palmitoyl transferase, we take the carnitine back off and make it back into acyl-CoA. That's this activation step, and it's called activation because we actually use some ATP. Up until now, we haven't used any either. We have a little bit of ATP that we use to move it inside the muscle cell. That's the big deal. We've done translocation, and so then the actual step that is beta oxidation is when you've got it into the mitochondria. It's an acyl-CoA, and then we turn it into acetyl-CoA. That is technically beta. But when we do that, here we actually reduce, we make some NADH, we make some FADH that can donate. And so this process is going to be partially regulated, this beta oxidation step. It's acyl-CoA to acetyl-CoA. And it gets turned on when we've got sort of higher levels of NAD and FAD. So when ATP turnover is high, there's more of this that activates this. And there's a lot of NADH and FADH when we aren't using a lot of energy. It's going to mostly inhibit whatever all of this. If we've got a lot of stuff coming, acetyl-CoA coming from glucose, coming from pyruvate, some of this. Okay. Okay. Got this beta oxidation, blah, blah, blah. Then it gets done in the mitochondria. You don't have to calculate this, but I'm just going to show you guys that if we have basically 116 carbon free fatty acid that is palmitate, as it goes through the entire process, we can make 106 ATP. It's about 3 times what we make by fully breaking down the molecule. So in that way, right? It's a long process, but I make a huge amount of energy. And I make no metabolic byproducts. You guys will see when we talk about fatigue, we do carbohydrate metabolism in aerobic metabolism. We don't make byproducts. But when you use up your muscle glycogen, or if your blood glucose levels get too low, so if you use up too many carbs, even if it's all aerobic, and your brain becomes very unhappy and it's worried you're going to go into a coma. So it will make you stop exercise. So when we use fat, metabolizing fat through aerobic metabolism is essentially the only metabolic way to make ATP, but we basically have no chance of fatigue. We're not going to use up anything that causes fatigue. We're not going to make anything that causes fatigue. Problem is, this is a slow process. It usually takes 20, 30 minutes after you start exercising to ramp up lipase activity, start putting free fatty acids into the blood, to move them into the cell, to move them into the mitochondria, and run them through the Krebs cycle and transport them. So it's slow. So you cheat like I did. We're going to activate this by doing resistance. It works. That's kind of where we are. Okay. And so this has always happened. You eat some fat at lunch, you've got some fat already floating around in your blood, you take it up, boom, we do it. You guys are resting. Okay. If you've eaten some fat recently, or maybe you didn't eat breakfast, you haven't eaten lunch. Wouldn't you know? How about that? Right? Then you're going to have mobilized some fat out of adipose tissue. Rest, because energy demand is low. Typically, unless you've just eaten a bunch of carbs, fat is the primary energy substrate in aerobic metabolism. Okay. There's a caveat illustrated in this picture. Okay. Caveat is that as exercise intensity increases, okay, this is showing percentage of VO2 max that we're exercising and the rate of fat oxidation or the rate of fat breakdown to give us energy during exercise. 55% of VO2. Some of you, that's a really brisk walk. For most of you, it's probably just kind of a nice light jog. Okay. It's about right here. And it ramps up a little bit. You know, in an average person, it tends to peak somewhere between 60 and 65% of VO2 max, depending on how fit you are. Not be that for me because I'm very, very unfit. And then as intensity goes up, it begins to drop off. We burn a larger percentage of our calories from fat at low to moderate exercise intensities. The reason that this is that at high intensities, the energy demand is so great that breaking down fat is too slow. Too slow. Plus, we're going to start making things from carbohydrate components and other sides of anaerobic hydrogen are going to begin to shut down aerobic metabolic pathways. And so there's kind of this double whammy effects that are going to be. Okay. You don't need to worry about what the substrates are or any of those things, but just there's this general fact. At higher intensity exercises, you burn less fat as a percentage of total caloric expenditure. Okay. This graph right here, Dr. Mike very much wants me to make sure that I show it. This is what is illustrating a concept that people used to spend a lot of time talking about, and it's called the crossover effect, carbohydrate and lipid metabolism. Okay. So we're going to start with this graph, and then I'll move over to the one that's slightly more complicated. What this is this is percentage of VO2 max, the exercise intensity here on the x-axis, and percentage of the fuel that is being utilized at that rate, at that metabolic rate. We have fat, we have carbohydrates. Here's fat, and here's carbohydrate. So at low intensity exercise, we're at like 80% fat, 20% carbs. That's like probably a walk. As we start to increase, we're going to reach some point where they're going to cross over each other. Okay. Where it's basically 50-50, and then fat begins to drop and it gets replaced by this increase in carbohydrate. This has been much studied, much talked about. Can we shift where this occurs to the right, to like higher exercise intensities? What does this tell us about where we should train? What does this tell us about what we should do to try to lose adipose tissue or to try to maximize performance? A whole host of different. This is basically what's going on. This is the same graph, okay, but it has actually partitioned out. Are the carbohydrates coming from glycogen here in the solid line? No, I apologize. Glycogen is the dotted line, or is it coming from blood glucose? So free glucose from the bloodstream here versus glucose from glycogen, and then there's fat. Okay. So if you sort of average the two carbohydrate ones together,
you get. Okay. And I appreciate, right, that in this one, we're kind of curving this way, and in this one, we're curving the other way. The idea is basically the same. Okay? That's what it's showing. So there is some sort of inflection. For these. Okay. This information has been taken in some people to mean, let's say, I want to lose subcutaneous fat. What kind of exercise? Well, I'm going to walk. Because if I walk, 80% of my calories that I'm burning are going to come from fat. You walk for an hour. Went 3.5 miles. Burned 350 calories. Okay. 80% of that 350 came from there. I don't know what 80% of 350 is, like 250. Basically, have come from 260. Come from fat. Or I'm going to jog for the same hour. 600 calories. So I'm at 50-50. 50% of 600 calories is 300 calories. So I actually burned by running, even though a smaller percentage of my calories burned were from fat. I burned so many more calories that I actually burned more fat. So I don't know. There are a lot of ways to kind of construe some of these things and to wring our hands over it. I just want you guys to understand in some ways what's happening. Okay. The body is going to use whatever you make available to it. It does not generally care where the ATP comes from. It just knows that it needs it. Okay. So if you give it a bunch of carbs, it's going to use a bunch of carbs. If you give it a bunch of fat, it's going to use fat. If you give it both carbs and fat at varying exercise intensities, we will shift around what we're able to do because of the speed of the pathway. And because some of our byproducts of either using carbs generally are going to inhibit our ability to use fat.
Is that everything? Sites of regulation, yep. Okay. Boom. Okay. Tomorrow we're going to talk about sort of metabolism as a practical application during a bout of activity. So how do we measure how much energy you're using during a bout of exercise? What is all of that stuff? What are you bringing me tomorrow? What are you going to do to your? I mean, I don't know. What can you do to your pets? What are you not doing with your pets? However, they make it onto the databases at the rats and sororities. Let's just not do that. Okay. All right, bye guys. Stapler should be right there. It's not super clear. Can't imagine why you would have questions. Given how I felt when I was done. Yes, we'll figure it out. Wait, did you emailed me again today? I apologize, I didn't respond. Has anything changed from what you said? No. We'll figure it out. So, we're trying to, if you didn't need a reminder email, try it. Do that, it will be fine. It's next week. Or is it the last? It's the last week. Okay. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's a Thursday, but I couldn't remember it. So, okay, just remind me.
It might take a while.
Okay.
You can.
No.
I set my thing up there and I got. It means that that's right. Okay. Check my math. I actually added all of those correctly, but that's what it means.
Okay.
Is that I got the grading thing off and I was like, looks like the right answer.
I think there's a lot of that's a choice. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. It's about as bad as fat burning, but no, this is on Instagram. It's starting to be like. Is that Andrew? You training anything doing this?
Never heard of a cold shot. I need to Google cold shot, but, so my only argument to all. So, and I used to do this as pro science in a different class. There is evidence that you drink cold water, right? You have to warm the cold water up to body temperature. Awesome. But drinking a cold drink actually it burns calories to warm the cold drink up to room. Now, the problem is that it takes so few calories to actually do that. Does it matter if you burn one more calorie versus another? That is, you put yourself in there, you're going to shiver, like you let yourself then sort of warm yourself back up. You're going to burn calories to do that. At least it keeps your body. Problem is, what is 3 to 6 minutes actually long enough burning of this? Okay, great, you're activating around that, maybe, okay, but again, it's just if you want to lose adipose tissue, you have to activate hormone sensitive adipose. Break down the existing fat tissue, dump it in, and then try to use it for energy. Because if you then eat more than whatever you have, the exact opposite happens. Extra glucose and things floating around. We are best animals almost entirely in all of nature at storing carbohydrates. That's a piece of thing. Our genetics, we're so good at it. And now we don't ever move so we don't burn it and we just flood our system. So there's this disconnect why we get sick. I don't know. I'll try to look at something about a cold shot protein.
Okay.
And
Because I started doing it. Ice bath is working for me, and I started doing cryo. It's like it's 75, 5 minutes, and it's helping me. And what my athletic trainer said, it's kind of like what these guys said, like your blood flow is getting more closer to your core and like or like your heart and everything. And you get it out, it's so hot, like you're supposed to get like your extend like legs and everything, and your blood flow is going faster to your arms and legs. And that is the reason why your recovery is faster because blood flow is going directly to your muscles and like joints.
you want the blood flow to go directly to your muscles.
That's what I'm saying.
Which is what happens when you shiver. I mean, you're contracting the muscles, right? In those ways. And then again, that presupposes, right, that in some way, that difference in blood flow has some real meaningful effect on something. And in some people, and in some circumstances, it probably does. But that's like, yeah, I'm going to take the NO explode, get all this extra stuff after my workout. It's all there anyway. That was never the problem. So, blood flow to the muscle is usually our problem during exercise, unless you have some kind of cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis, or you're a smoker or something, and you have a reduced ability to vasodilate. And you exercise, all goes to the muscle anyway. And you get it home. Then it goes away. I don't know. So,
Thank you.
Okay,
I just wanted to be ready.
no, I appreciate that. I love, we said it all like to set it to the music.
That's
Of
what I was
interstellar.
Yeah, now. It sounds like, oh, yeah, this is the right team, and should do this.
If we put Hans Zimmer music on it, everything seems awesome.
And the way how he's talking actually is like making that he's right.
Right.
Yeah. Should be really. Thank you.
Okay, so as far as like NADH and like FADH go, like we just need to know that like when they are like just know where they're donating their electrons. Like, okay, so like this whole like we don't need to know that.
No. The real thing. Have these in AD and FAD. Some in the cytoplasm. A lot. Look for glycolysis to run as we sort of break things down, full electrons. Acetyl-CoA, Krebs, lipid on oxaloacetate citrate. As you spin around the Krebs cycle, we pull carbons for. We then, as much as possible, take all of the NADH. Those electrons. On the side, move the hydrogen right with all those electrons. Instance of going from pyruvate acid, we take those NADH a cytosol as we went from glucose to pyruvate. Keeps us with some completely NAD molecules in the cytoplasm to be able to continue to propose. That's all you've got to do, right? And the idea that right, you get more energy from NAD it's outside. Its electrons connection farther down the chain. We go to 4 cytoplasms. That's FAD. So it doesn't move as far. So there's, as it doesn't move as far, it doesn't allow for some hydrogen out into that. So out into this, but it creates less of the that's the thing. But if we don't have this whole process, aerobic metabolism stops. You mess up and there's no oxygen. Nowhere for the electrons. The electron transport chain. Cytochromes continue to be bound. No NADH really stops. If you would not recycle some cytoplasm, cannot go through out having free all of them.
Okay, perfect. And then when you say like, okay, aerobic, like the products of aerobic metabolism, like that's different than like product like Krebs. Like Krebs is like part of that. But it's like
Can you give me some context for what I'm actually saying?
Like- okay. So when you say
What
like,
did I say? There are no metabolic byproducts. Aerobic. That was ETC or glycolysis or really only it's not. You only the real metabolic byproducts that you care about. Ions. And inorganic phosphate. The potassium and inorganic phosphate cause a lot of problems with calcium abuse. Hydrogen. Make your muscles thick, metabolism, and the contractile machinery, irrespective of how this starts to change.
okay, thank you.
You got it. Turn your back. Pardon?
I do go to college.
Okay.
You want to sit here and watch me while I do the grading, or you don't care?
Finish the short part?
Yeah.
Alright. Did you like fall asleep in the middle of grading or just?
I think.
Just-
I think something happened, and I set it on the stack of the ones that had already
And then you
been
see-
grading, and then I just like, oh, it's over there, so I'm just going to keep going, and then I covered yours up, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, you know. So basically, the neuromuscular junction question,
Yeah,
like that's basically a whole letter grade. Just from that one, Jordan. So as I said, correct them. I'll give y'all half the points back. We'll be in good shape,
okay.
and we'll kind of know what to
I
expect.
just wanted to come back. To you, so I
Okay.
think it's tomorrow and then everyone else from there.
Okay.
Alright, thank you. Are you gonna update the coffee line, the YouTube? No.
So I need to get yesterday's
This one